I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. In January 1989, the New York Times and the Washington Post published obituaries of a man named Robert Knudsen. Now, who was Robert Knudsen? Knudsen was an official White House photographer who served under 5 presidencies, going all the way back to Harry Truman and extending forward all the way into the presidency of Richard Nixon. In 1963, Knudsen was working for the Kennedy White House. His job would be to follow the president around and take photographs of him, both in official settings and social settings. In fact, if you see photographs today of President Kennedy playing with his children, the likelihood is that Knudsen took those photographs. These 2 obituaries stated that Knudsen had been the official photographer for the Kennedy autopsy, which was carried out on November 22, 1963. Now, by the time the Assassination Records Review Board was established in the 1990s, Knudsen had already passed away. The ARRB, as you'll recall, was the commission that Congress called into existence to enforce the JFK Records Act, which required federal agencies to disclose their JFK-related papers to the public. Knudsen's wife and children appeared before the ARRB and told them that on the afternoon of the assassination, November 22, 1963, Knudsen was summoned to appear at the Andrews Air Force Base to meet the incoming Air Force One that contained President Johnson and the casket that contained the body of President Kennedy. According to his family, he stayed away for 3 complete days. When he returned home, he told his family that he had been the photographer for the autopsy, but that he could not disclose any of the details because he had been sworn to secrecy. He said that he had been told this was a highly classified operation and that under no circumstances could he divulge what happened to anyone. His wife said that he was taking the same position as any military man would, that when he got classified information, he would take it to the grave with him. In 1977, Knudsen gave an interview before a national magazine called Popular Photography, in which he stated in the interview that he had been the official photographer for the autopsy and that it was, in his words, the hardest thing he had ever done. 2 years before that, he had testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And one of the fascinating things about the interrogation of Knudsen during those proceedings was that the questioner scrupulously avoided asking him any questions about his photographing the autopsy. Instead, the examination was severely and strictly limited to Knudsen's role in helping to develop the photographs. But even then, Knudsen made it very clear that he had been sworn to secrecy and that he was extremely reluctant to violate that oath of secrecy by disclosing classified information, even before this official proceeding. Now, there's one big problem with all of this. And what is that problem? The problem is that Knudsen was not the photographer for the autopsy. In fact, he wasn't at the autopsy at all. The official photographer for the autopsy was a man named John T. Stringer, who handled many of the autopsies for the Navy there at the Bethesda morgue, and who actually taught photography at the Bethesda Navy Medical School. Everybody acknowledges that Stringer was the official photographer for the autopsy. Nobody questions that. And nobody questions the fact that Knudsen wasn't even there. So what's going on here? Well, clearly Knudsen's not going to make up a story that's going to jeopardize the reputation that he had among 5 presidents for integrity and credibility and competence. And certainly when he gave that interview before that national magazine, he could easily have been called out, but he wasn't. No one came forward to question that he had been the official photographer for the autopsy. So what's happening here? Well, it's a virtual certainty that Knudsen actually did photograph something that he was honestly convinced was the autopsy of President Kennedy, and that he had been made to believe by someone or some group of people that what he was photographing was in fact the autopsy. Now here's the kicker. After his testimony before the House Select Committee, mid-1970s, he returned home, and he told his wife that he had been shown photographs of the autopsy, and that those photographs were fraudulent, that they were bogus. And he told his wife that if this thing were ever to blow up, that he wanted her to know and he wanted his kids to know that he had had nothing to do with it. He couldn't disclose what he had done. He wouldn't violate his oath of secrecy, but he wanted them to know. He wanted to preserve his integrity within his own family. He wanted them to know that he had played no role in it whatsoever.